Let yourself come into this time and this place. Let your whole self be present. Whatever you bring, whoever you are, whatever questions you are asking, whatever joys and sorrows you are carrying, all of you is welcome here in this moment as the sound of the bowl calls us as one to truth, love, and action, calls us to community. Breathe and listen. In 1855, Walt Whitman published the first edition of Leaves of Grass. While some of his work hasn't aged well in its gender binaries or racial terminology, I believe there is still wisdom to be found and to be riffed on. In 1980, the movie Fame was released. Has anyone seen that movie, Fame? Okay. So it told the story of young actors trying to make it in the big city. They're going on auditions, they're facing questions of morality and ethics and power as they learn who they are. And there's a song from that musical that riffs on a poem from the original Leaves of Grass. That poem is I Sing the Body Electric, right? Whitman writes at the very beginning of that poem, I sing the body electric, the armies of those I love engirth me and I engirth them. They will not let me off till I go with them, respond to them and discorrupt them, and charge them full with the charge of the soul. Was it doubted that those who corrupt their own bodies conceal themselves? And if those who defile the living are as bad as those who defiled the dead? And if the body does not do fully as much as the soul? And if the body were not the soul, what is the soul? The poem continues, you can go look it up and read it, focusing on the bodies of men and women, their sacredness, their wholeness, their role in existence and creation and joy. It's an enumeration of the wonders of our human forms in 19th century terms. The song from Fame takes a slightly different approach, though it carries the same sense of wonder and vastness and glory inherent in our physical bodies, not just in our souls. That one goes, I sing the body electric, I celebrate the me yet to come, I toast to my own reunion when I become one with the sun. And I'll look back on Venus, I'll look back on Mars, and I'll burn with the fire of 10 million stars. And in time, we will all be stars. And I've been thinking about both of those bits of poetry this week. You should go listen to the song, it's great. I've been thinking about what it meant for Whitman to claim this place of primacy for the body in 1855, calling out that the soul and the body are one, that to denigrate our bodies or separate our souls from our bodies is to deny ourselves and each other wholeness. And I've been thinking about what it meant to say in 1980, I celebrate me, the me that I will become, my reunion with my whole self, body, spirit, and mind. Calling out that we are entire beings, stars, wonders, full of fire and inspiration and possibility. If you've been around USR long enough, you know that I preach often about becoming, about wholeness, about the holiness of being ourselves. Today, we are going to talk actually to and with each other about things that historically religion hasn't wanted to talk about, unless it wanted to pigeonhole us or judge us or separate us from ourselves for the sake of morality. Today, we're talking about autonomy and wholeness when it comes to gender, to sex, and to reproductive rights. Because this community, this faith community, this community of questions and spirits and freedom understands that these things are part of our human lives. They matter. How we understand them for ourselves, how we expect them to be treated in our shared communities, how we create justice around them matters. So today, in words and song and chat, We are going to affirm wholeness, autonomy, humanity, love. Our first reading is a brief one from a speech by Elizabeth Canfield, a professor of gender and sexuality, from a speech about teaching about sex. And she said, "I've often wondered what it would be like if we taught young people swimming in the same way we teach young sexuality. If we told them that swimming was an important adult activity, one they will have to be skilled at when they grow up, but we never talked with them about it. We never showed them the pool, we just allowed them to stand outside closed doors and listen to all the splashing. Occasionally, they might catch a glimpse of partially clothed people going in and out of the door to the pool, and maybe they'd find a hidden book on the art of swimming. But when they asked a question about how swimming felt or what it was about, they would be greeted with blank and embarrassed looks. Suddenly, when they turned 18, we would fling open the doors to the pool and they would jump in. Miraculously, some might learn to tread water, but many would drown." I remember in the 6th grade, and this would have been like the early 90s in New York City, we were separated for sex education, health education, girls in one room, boys in the other, gender binary, right? And then an awkward set of slides announcing what was to come in puberty, announcing it too late, right? Some of us had already started puberty, already started menstruating, had growth spurts where we were as tall as we were ever gonna be. The awkward 6th grade sex education was followed up by a health class in 7th and 8th, the general thrust of which was, have sex and you will either get pregnant or die from AIDS. And I can assure you that for many, though of course not all, many of us coming of age in the 80s and 90s, that was the curriculum, and it was scarring at best because it relied on fear, not knowledge. I was deeply aware as a child that it was much more than my parents got, right? I've learned it was much more than my peers in other parts of the country got. My parents, what they learned was from other kids or from magazines, and all of that were half-truths at best, right? A bit later, and I can't remember what grade, honestly, I had the precursor to Our Whole Lives, which is the health and sexuality program we do here. I had the precursor at my church. That was about your sexuality. And I learned in that room things that no one had ever taught me. And it was in its own way a little scary because it opened this whole door that no one had ever addressed. But I will tell you that all the way through college, it was me that my friends came to for advice on ethical decision-making, for accurate information about bodies and sex, and for support when they had to do difficult things because they knew they wouldn't face judgment. When I became a parent, I was determined not to have my children learn from their peers or have to turn to someone like me back then. So I got trained in OWL for the youngest grades, and from the beginning, I have answered my children's questions and provided resources. And I will tell you honestly that it is both one of the aspects of my parenting that I am most proud of, but it is also one that has not always been easy. When your child turns to you and asks how anal and oral sex work, like what actually happens? What's the mechanics, right? Because they've read it in the books that you gave them and they want to understand. Responding with age-appropriate clarity, affirmation of the beauty of human loving and living, concentrating always on consent and that these are choices grown-ups make together about desire and pleasure, and just like not totally freaking out about the whole thing. It's not easy. It's not easy, but I will absolutely maintain that every one of those awkward conversations has been 100% worth it because knowledge is power and I want my children to be powerful. Honesty breeds honesty and I want my children to be honest. A lack of judgment from their closest family means less shame out in the world, and I want my children to be proud in the world. And I want them to come to me every time with their questions and their seeking and their wonderings about themselves and this world and the people they love. I don't want them going to the internet or their friends. I want to be able to give them body affirming, gender affirming, love affirming, sex affirming, life affirming, pleasure affirming answers that hold them responsible, give them a code of ethics, ingrain deeply in them the necessity for enthusiastic consent every time. It isn't easy, but it's vital. Earlier in the fall, we had a conversation about the ongoing issue in New Jersey right now, where there are conversations about how and when to reach kids about sex and gender and health and safety as new health education standards are being normalized. The new standards don't vary wildly from the old standards, but they have provided new opportunity for conservative groups to claim that the material will corrupt or groom children, and that it introduces too early things they don't need to know about gender or sex. And I kind of call BS on that, right? How many times have we heard adults express that they wish they had had clear and ethically grounded sexual education so they wouldn't have felt as though they were floundering in the deep end, released into the pool as adults? It's a matter of justice, equity, safety, and autonomy that we let go of prudish, Puritan notions and get more comfortable talking about sex. My guess is most of you have never heard a minister say anal sex from the pulpit. In keeping with today's topic, the wholeness and uniqueness of every person, we're gonna do some sharing, so I'm gonna give you some instruction. First, my friends on Zoom, you're gonna share in the chat, just in the interest of smooth functioning. Lily is there with you, can facilitate that conversation. Here in person, I'm gonna ask you to turn to someone near you. You can always opt out. I wanna make that really clear. If you'd rather spend this time that we're gonna do sharing in just personal reflection, you can let your neighbor know that. No shame, no judgment, it's entirely your choice. The question that I want you to talk to each other about for just a few minutes, and then I'll ring a bell to bring us back, is did you receive a formal sex education at school or in a class like OWL at church? What did it cover? What do you think, if you think anything, about the standards in New Jersey and the debates that have arisen around them? I want to say one last thing before I release you to chat. I am very aware that conversations about sex have the potential to be triggering for folks. I'm going to ask you to remember that this is not a moment for sharing traumatic past experiences. My door is always open. You can come talk to me and share with me. This is a moment to answer the question just, did you have formal sex education, yes or no, and what did it cover, okay? And how are you feeling about the debates in New Jersey? So I'm gonna release you to chat for just a few minutes, and then we'll come back together, okay? See how I'm gonna have to pull it back. I know it's like really interesting. Yeah. That is not loud enough. I know it's fun to share. I know it's super fun to share, and you'll have 2 more chances. Yes, and there's always coffee hour. Friends, bring it back, bring it back. Bring it back. I'm so glad that you got right into that. That was awesome. So I wanted to share with you, I had an experience this week. I belong to a Facebook group that's sort of geographically located for moms. And often people will pipe up with, my kid asked this and I don't know how to answer, or my kid looked up this on the internet and then went down a rabbit hole of things I didn't want them to see. And another post like this happened the other day. And I wrote a response that ended up being censored by the moderators. I'm still really mad about it. That response said essentially that having trained in and taught sex ed, I've learned a few things. And so since I couldn't say it there, I'm saying it here. Here's what I've learned, right? Knowledge keeps children and frankly adults safer. Education and honesty reduce shame. Talking about gender and sex don't make people different from who they are or make them start having sex. If anything, talking about it opens the space for wholeness and ethics and responsibility. If I refuse to talk about sex, how do I talk about protection and consent and the joy that is supposed to be part of physical pleasure? If I refuse to talk about gender, how do the people around me know that they are safe with me and that I'll embrace their fullness? Talking is better than silence if we want truth and love and justice. And we often don't have these conversations with children because we think they aren't ready, right? But they are ready. It's not gonna corrupt them. It's gonna prepare them to swim and have a full life. True autonomy includes understanding our bodies and knowing how to use them ethically for pleasure. Okay, so that's our section on sex. We're gonna move into our section on gender. And to begin this, we have a video. For some of you, this information may be old hat. For others of you, it may be brand new. I invite you to listen with open minds and open hearts.
Hello, and welcome to the Transliteracy Project created by Honest Accomplice Theater. I'm your host, Maybe Burke. So at this point, it might be helpful if we had some definitions for some of the labels that we use. First off, why do we have labels?
In a world that doesn't leave space for more than two genders, having labels and words to describe our experiences is a way to gain access to resources we need and to gain visibility.
Now here's the big reveal. Yes, the binary impacts trans people, but it also impacts people who aren't trans.
Hi, Maybe.
I see.
So, cis, spelled C-I-S, means on the same side. We use the word cisgender to refer to people who do identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth. So it's not just trans people who have gender identities, cis people have gender identities too, as women or men.
And transgender is a term for anybody whose gender identity differs from the one that they were assigned at birth.
Trans and cis are terms that have been around for thousands of years.
And actually, so have trans people.
This just in, a discovery this year of trans people.
Nope. While trans people might be gaining more recognition right now, we've always been here. We just didn't have the words to describe who we were.
And isn't it powerful to know that trans liberation impacts everyone, not just trans people? It frees all of us from the oppressive construct of women and men.
So let's take a look at some of the labels that people use and define them.
A gender nonconforming person might not identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth, or they might not identify with gender more broadly as a construct.
Genderqueer. It can be an umbrella term or a specific identity that one would choose. It is someone who feels like they're not necessarily trans, cis, or non-binary. They tend to adopt this gender identity.
Gender fluid. Rather than existing on a stationary point on the gender spectrum, one can float along it, therefore being more masculine, feminine, both, or neither from day to day.
Transmasculine. A transmasculine person is a transgender person who identifies in a masculine direction but doesn't necessarily identify as male.
Transfeminine, a transgender person who identifies in a female direction.
Non-binary is an umbrella term for all those that don't identify as men or women. Although there are many gender identities within non-binary, some people identify as just non-binary as a rejection of the entire construct of gender.
Agender, somebody who has no gender identity, also known as genderless.
Bigender individuals have two or more gender identities. They may experience these gender identities at the same time or at different times.
Polygender, having multiple gender identities, particularly four or more. This can be at the same time or at different times.
Demigirl is a gender identity for someone who is female-like, someone who is some combination of non-binary but tends to be a little closer to female.
Demiboy, a person whose gender identity is at least partly, but perhaps not entirely, male, boyish, or masculine.
Often you'll see the word trans with an asterisk attached to it. That asterisk is used to make sure that trans is an umbrella term to include all identities, but a lot of people feel that their identity is already included in the transgender umbrella, so to add that asterisk is just further marginalizing non-binary and gender non-conforming identities. Again, this is a case-by-case basis and everybody feels differently about it.
There are some other great ones from Honest Accomplice Theater, so you can head online and check those out. It's really helpful, to me at least, to see those definitions like really just articulated clearly. I'm a cisgender female, and I've never understood myself as anything else. Growing up, these were not terms that I was taught ever. I can't remember how old I was. It was probably high school before anyone gave me the meaning of trans shared in the video. The words I heard when I was young are words we would never use now. And the terminology was applied to a wide range of folks with different identities and desires and needs. And that terminology almost universally conflated sexual identity and gender identity. These are two wholly different things. And the terms usually carried a whole bunch of judgment and moral self-righteous nonsense. When I was young, I totally wanted to be like my older brother. I wished I could pee standing up. I was convinced that if I'd been a boy, I would have been tall and thin and handsome like he was. And I looked around the world and I saw that it was much easier to be a man, more power, more options, more prestige. Even in a time when girls were being told that they could have it all and be anything, I could see that wasn't true. I saw what my mother had to sacrifice in order to stay home with us, and I saw what my aunt had to sacrifice in order to have the career that she loved. As a kid, I remember feeling often that it would have been better to be a boy, but I never felt like a boy. For all my refusal to wear dresses, for all the times I was called a tomboy, from all my rejection of makeup and fashion and jewelry, some of the markers even now a feminine expression of gender, I never understood myself as anything other than a girl. One that was sometimes super mad about her body and its limitations and its truths, but a girl nonetheless. And that, I can be honest and admit that that can make it hard for me to understand the spectrum of gender experience because it isn't my experience. I don't always grasp the nuances. The differences in terms can be challenging for me. And there's a part of me that feels like, ugh, labels, let's just all be who we are and forget about gender labels. But that impulse is a cop-out. It's easy for me to feel that because I am cisgender. There's a safety in my cisgenderness, a freedom that allowed me as a young person to reject the trappings of traditional femininity and still be a girl and then a woman. Though, of course, in the 80s and 90s, there was a cost to rejecting certain ways of being a woman. The media gave us an ideal, and that resulted in many of us having complicated relationships to our bodies and our femininity. But still, it was an option. It was largely safe. It was accepted. There is a safety even now in my cisgenderness. My identity means that I don't have to fight to carve out space for myself. It's been carved for millennia. It's easy for me to say, let's all just be ourselves because I've been allowed to be myself, right? When we care about others, when we care about justice, about the wholeness and autonomy of every person, the easy road isn't always the right road. We have to focus on what is just and moral, and we have to make ourselves learn even when it's challenging and adjust, even when it's uncomfortable, and embrace and also reflect on our own lives. This time, the question I'm going to ask you to answer is this. Having watched the video and maybe already beginning to think about how gender was spoken about when you were young or what expectations were put on you because of your perceived gender, I'm going to invite you, as you are willing, to type into the chat or turn to your neighbor and talk about this. Whatever your gender identity, and you don't need to declare that in this moment if you don't feel comfortable, what are some moments in your life when you've been very aware of gender and its operation in the world, okay? And the implications. So take a couple minutes to talk. Friends on Zoom, take a couple minutes to share. I'll ring you back when it's time. Thank you. So I shared with you that I don't always grasp the nuances, and I'm acutely aware of my lack of personal experience in needing to demand space for my self-understanding. But here's the really important part, right? Here's the part that matters. At the end of the day, really all day, every day, not just at the end of the day, I also know it doesn't matter if I get it on a personal, visceral level. All I really need to get is love. All I really need to get is respect, honor, compassion, and kindness, because my deep personal understanding is actually immaterial when we're talking about someone else's wholeness and autonomy. I don't have to understand exactly what's going on in someone else's heart to respect their pronouns, honor their personhood, allow them self-determination, and celebrate their uniqueness and their absolute worth. True autonomy includes the ability to discern our own gender and determine how to express it.
So our final resource this morning comes from the website of the national organization Sister Song, founded in 1997 by a collective of reproductive rights organizations of women of color. On their website, they offer the following insight into reproductive justice, and understand I will be speaking their words. Sister Song defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children or not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. Indigenous women, women of color, and trans people have always fought for reproductive justice, but the term was invented in 1994. Right before attending the International Conference on Population and Development in Cairo, where the entire world agreed that the individual right to plan your own family must be central to global development, a group of Black women gathered in Chicago in June of 1994. They recognized that the women's rights movement, led by and representing middle-class and wealthy white women, could not defend the needs of women of color and other marginalized women and trans people. We needed to lead our own national movement to uplift the needs of the most marginalized women, families, and communities. These women named themselves Women of African Descent for Reproductive Justice, and RJ was born. Rooted in the internationally accepted human rights framework created by the United Nations, reproductive justice combines reproductive rights and social justice. The progenitors of RJ launched the movement by publishing a historic full-page statement with 800+ signatures in the Washington Post and Roll Call. Just 3 years later, in 1997, Sister Song was formed to create a national multi-ethnic RJ movement. We believe that reproductive justice is a human right. RJ is based on the United Nations internationally accepted Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a comprehensive body of law that details the rights of individuals and the responsibilities of government to protect those rights. Reproductive justice is about access, not choice. Mainstream movements have focused on keeping abortion legal as an individual choice. That is necessary, but not enough. Even when abortion is legal, many women of color cannot afford it or cannot travel hundreds of miles to the nearest clinic. There is no choice where there is no access. Reproductive justice is not just about abortion. Abortion access is critical, and women of color and other marginalized women also have difficulty accessing contraception, comprehensive sex education, prevention and care for sexually transmitted infections, alternative birth options, adequate prenatal and pregnancy care, domestic violence assistance, adequate wages to support our families, safe homes, and so much more.
As I'm sure many of you are aware, 50 years ago today, the decision was handed down in the case Roe v. Wade. For all of my life until last year, Roe v. Wade stood as the law of the land, and though debated and undermined all too often, abortions have been legal. Not always accessible, but theoretically legal. Hangers and shady doctors and back alleys were the stuff of story by the time I was coming of age. They were referenced in movies like Dirty Dancing, set years before my own youth and young adulthood. They were the stories of the feminists before my generation, the ones who protested and fought and marched and worked tirelessly to ensure greater liberation and greater freedom for all of us. Their hard work laid the ground for further justice work and for my freedom. And it was then, as Sister Song notes, women of color in the 90s who broadened our collective understanding of reproductive justice, moving us beyond issues of abortion's legality and into issues of access, into questions of healthcare and support systems, taking up this wider understanding of reproductive justice as bodily autonomy, not only in terms of our right to not have a child, but also our right to have a child and raise that child safely and with support. Also our right to be ourselves in a body that makes sense to us and receive healthcare. Also for that healthcare not to be disproportionately negligent and dangerous for women of color and poor women and rural women. I probably don't need to tell you the abysmal state of healthcare in much of this country. It's inaccessibility geographically, financially, or because of prejudice. For my entire life until last year, abortion was protected, and the fight has been progressing toward even greater equality. And what an unbelievable blow last year was. Not only to the legality of and access to abortion, but to all of the ripples of implication. Across the country, groups are trying to make having a naturally occurring miscarriage a crime. A miscarriage is often our body's way of ending a non-viable pregnancy. We don't actually have a choice about it. Under new proposed restrictions, assisted reproduction becomes dicier if a couple struggling with infertility creates embryos but doesn't implant them. Is discarding those embryos now a crime punishable by law? What about morning after pills and birth control pills and pregnancies that can take the life of the childbearing adult? Will young people with uteruses freezing their eggs to allow greater freedom of career and timing, is that going to be considered a crime? Where does the intrusion into a person's autonomy end? And with these new laws, will there be others that create better systems that support childbirth and child rearing? Will we make life easier for those whose autonomy we're taking away? Spoiler, no, probably not. For this last section of sharing, I actually want to give you a chance to vent it out. So I'm going to ask you to turn to your partner or write on the chat, try to keep your language clean, what your reaction has been to the overturning of Roe v. Wade last year, how you're feeling now about the state of the fight for reproductive justice, okay? Go for it. Oh yeah, if you hear me, clap once. Could I do that one? If you hear me, clap once. If you hear me, clap twice. There'll be plenty of time at coffee hour because we have coffee hour back today, so you can chat about all of these things more. There is, I think, a recognized urge out in the world among some to legislate and corral women's bodies, the bodies of any who transgress the structures and systems of power that have historically placed men at the top. Those who wish to create those restraints are not always men, people of all genders and races and walks of life. I think, but I'd love at one point to hear your thoughts too, I think it comes from a desire for control with a heavy overlay of moralizing self-righteousness. And often, I think it comes from folks who've never had to face decisions like this in their actual lives or advocate for their very lives. Often an insistence on the gender binary, a determination to not teach folks about their bodies and about sex, a rejection of folks' right to choose their reproductive path go hand in hand, all of those three. And I suppose for some, they truly believe that those of us who cross any of those lines are going to hell. Good thing I don't believe in hell. But also, frankly, even if I did, how is my eternal hereafter any of their business, right? Especially in the eyes of secular law. I think for others, it's probably really about power and tradition and fear and ignorance, and those are terrible bases for making decisions for anyone. Certainly not a good basis for making decisions for others. True autonomy includes being trusted to make choices for our own bodies and our own futures. The next verse of that song from Fame goes like this. I sing the body electric, I glory in the glow of rebirth, creating my own tomorrow when I shall embody the earth. And I'll serenade Venus, and I'll serenade Mars, and I'll burn with the fire of 10 million stars, and in time, we will all be stars. And I have found myself stuck on that one line, creating my own tomorrow. We have one life to live, such a short moment on this earth, learning and growing and trying and stumbling and trying again. I'll be the first to admit that life isn't, and I don't think really should be, all roses and perpetual joy, but to be made by arbitrary societal rules to be someone other than who we are, to be kept in ignorance about what our own body is capable of and how to enjoy our physicality in this life, to be forced into lifelong relationships and roles that we do not want. Life is too short for that nonsense. We want ourselves and we want everyone to live lives of wonder, know that they are stars and that vastness is possible. if we want all of that, if we want lives which are fully embodied, joyful, made according to our own choices, we have to work for them. We have to fight for them. We want lives in which our mind, our soul, our body, and our spirit work together with love to bring about the most wonderful experiences we can have on this planet while we can have them. We want for each of us to create our individual tomorrow with honesty and autonomy so that together we can create the most just and truth-filled and loving world possible. Creating my own tomorrow, creating our shared tomorrow in wholeness, in peace, and love, that's what we long for, and it will take us having hard conversations. It will take us opening to our own truths. It will take us continuing the work our forebears began, even when we get discouraged and have setbacks. It will take honoring each and every one of us in our unique unfolding and becoming. Then, in time, we will know what it means to glow like the sun and burn like the stars, at one with all creation, at peace with ourselves, part of the everlasting love that binds us all. May we ever work toward that goal together. So may it be. Let's celebrate our whole selves, who we are and who we will become. Let's keep working for a world in which every person can create tomorrow, and we can all be stars. Go in peace.